In this tutorial I'm going to show you how to create an armature for the sack buoy that we created from my website, and how to rig that armature to him so that you can animate him. So you'll see when I've opened up Blender here that I've got my render of sack buoy as he stands. So I'll go back to 3D view, and here you can see where we are in between at the moment. So I'll give myself a little bit of room by minimizing this properties window, and what I now need to do is add a bone that will start his skeletal structure off. So if I go to add, armature, single bone, I've now placed a bone in the center of this object. Now I'll bring the properties back and you'll see that we have an option here called object data. And if I click on object data, it has the armature selected at the moment. Now in this armature I can't see it because it's in the middle of sack buoy, but if I turn X-ray on, and I'll also turn names on, I can now see that armature and see that bone as it stands. So at the moment there's just one bone, and if you zoom in and have a look at this bone, you'll see that the bone has 3 components to it, which if I go to edit mode, you can see much more easily. This point here that is currently selected is the tail of the bone. If you select in the middle, it selects the whole bone itself, which allows you to move it. And at the very bottom you can select the root of the bone. So the root, whole bone and tail are important to know, you'll see as we build this armature. So I'll now move that out of the way. And what we're going to do with this bone is make that our spine. So I'm going to move that down into about the spine position, and you can see that it's not quite long enough. So if I select the tail and drag just the tail up to around his neck, and then I can do the same with the root, push that down underneath so that it's around his bottom. And in my armature here, this is the overall armature, that bone itself can be changed by selecting the bone option over here. So instead of being called bone, I'm going to call that spine. Okay, and now if I go to the side view, you can see it's fairly well placed. If I zoom in around the neck, it could probably be moved forward a tad and up around where the neck should be. So that's pretty good. And around the tail is pretty good. Okay, now what we need to do is build his head, and this is where extrusion is necessary. Extrusion, just like when you're extruding from a mesh, will move out of a bone structure as well. Just be aware that if you extrude from the root, it does not become a child of that bone, whereas if I extrude from the tail, then this extrusion becomes a child of this bone. So if I choose E to extrude and Z for the Z axis, I'll move that up to about where the top of his head should be, and you can see here that it's named it spine.001. So I'm going to rename that to be head, and then I'll just make sure that I'm happy with where that has placed his head. So I'm going to move that up to about there, and that appears to be looking pretty good. Okay. Now next thing I want to do is start doing his arms and his legs. Now in order to do arms and legs, you're probably aware that it is a symmetrical object, so it saves time by doing them both at the same time. So what I'll do is just make this a little smaller and bring up my tools menu, and the tools menu is context specific, so in this case it's talking about the armature, and in this armature you'll see you've got armature options which I'd like for the x-axis mirror to be on. So if I turn X-axis mirror on, it means that any actions I do on the side here will be mirrored. Now I'll select the tail. Now even though we're not quite sure if it's got the root or the tail, it will assume it's a tail if there's two connected parts, which is nice for us. Now what I'd like to do is extrude for the arms, which instead of just using E, I will do Shift E, and you'll see it produces a left and right. This is because I've got the X-axis mirror on. So I'll bring it out about, that far will do. And the next thing I need to do is select one of those. Because it's a mirror, you only have to do one. And what I'd like to do is disconnect that bone. Now this is because I don't need to make a scapula that goes from his neck across to his shoulder. I just need the arm to start working from where his shoulder would be. So in order to disconnect that bone, I press Alt and P to clear parent. In this case I don't want to clear the parent, I just want to disconnect the bone. And it now means if I move this bone, you can see it has a dotted line that basically indicates it's still part of that armature, but in this case it's not connected via a bone. So I'll move that into about where his shoulder would be, and the tail of that bone to about where his wrist would be. So let's zoom in and just fix this up. I'll get rid of my tool menu, make this one a little bit smaller, and do some fine work here. Now you can see that the root of this position here is well off. So I'm going to move that into position. It's a bit hard to spot. That's not so bad. And same with the tail. I need it to be where his wrist is. And that is not too bad. Okay, now remember it's happened on both sides because it's a mirror. And I'm pretty happy with that. Okay, next step, let's rename these bones. So I'll select that one. Instead of spine underscore L, this should be arm underscore L. The underscore L basically means that this is the left side, and if you use this nomenclature by keeping the underscore L, it means that when you're modeling later on, symmetry can be much easier to work with. So keep the underscore R there, that's my advice. Okay, now we have arm left and arm right, and you can see now I also probably need my hands to work, so I'll select the tail here and extrude the hand out. Now notice I didn't press Shift E because the Shift E was only necessary from the center. This is a mirror anyway, so I'm going to move the hands out to the ends of his fingertips. You may decide that you'd like to do fingers. In my case I'm not too fussed about him actually having fingers that move. So I will check the positioning of those fingers. So that should be about where the tip of his finger is. And that's looking good. So I'll rename that. Instead of arm underscore L dot 001, we will call it hand underscore L. Same with the right one. That will be hand underscore R. Okay, so now we have the hand, the arm, spine and head all sorted. Now to do the legs, similarly I don't need to give Sackboy a pelvis. So what I'm going to do is create another set of legs, then disconnect them from the spine. Now remember, if I try extruding from this root, it will not be a child of the spine, so I must extrude from the tail. So Shift E again. These are actually going to be his legs. And then if I want to disconnect those, I'll select one, Alt P, disconnect bone, bring it down to here. Now obviously I need to rotate that. So I'll rotate him around, and I can turn the roll off. I'm just setting that back to 0, and now I've got a pretty decent set of legs. So I'll move the root of the leg back to about where it should be. Same with the tail underneath his foot. So keep checking it from multiple angles. The ball that you see here is where it rotates about. So make sure you're happy with where that is. So that isn't looking too bad. The bottom probably needs to be out a little bit. That's good. Now I'm going to go to front view and just check this. You can see it has a slight roll. So I'm going to take the roll off, set that to 0. I must have rotated at some point. It's not the end of the world anyway, so I'll just leave that there. And they are pretty good. So I'll rename the left leg leg_L, and the right leg leg_R. And now we've created an armature for Sackboy. Now there are all the bones that I require. They're set up fairly well. And now the next step would be to actually rig it.